In September 2022, if you're studying military strategy and don't grasp the Kharkiv counteroffensive, you're overlooking one of the sharpest tactical masterstrokes of the modern era. This was far more than another clash in the Russia-Ukraine war. It was a pristine case study in how superior planning, deception, and execution can overcome daunting numerical disadvantages. What unfolded across 6 explosive days, from September 6th to September 11th, 2022, belongs in every military academy's curriculum for the next century. Ukraine didn't merely win a battle, it proved how a smaller, more agile force can systematically unmake a supposedly superior opponent through strategic genius. It was David versus Goliath for the 21st century. The raw numbers, which we'll examine, are striking, but the methods behind Ukraine's success reveal something more important. Russia's doctrine at the time was fundamentally broken, while Ukraine's approach showcased the future of modern warfighting. To appreciate the scale of Ukraine's achievement, you have to see how favorable the summer of 2022 looked for Russia. After capturing the strategic city of Izium in early April, Russia turned it into a major forward operating base, hosting up to 24 battalion tactical groups, about 18,000 troops, in and around the city. Izium was not just another outpost, it became a critical logistics hub, tying rail lines from Crimea over the Kerch Bridge through Russian territory and toward the Kharkiv region. Controlling Izium allowed Russia to feed its northern front efficiently and stage deeper pushes towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Yet here lay the fatal flaw. Throughout July and August, both Ukrainian and Russian media amplified talk of a grand Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson. By August, Russia had drawn down at least half its Izium battalions to reinforce the south. This was no accident. Ukraine's general staff weaponized information operations, leaning on mainstream media to trumpet a coming Kherson push, even as they shifted troops and equipment to Kharkiv. Classic misdirection, perfectly tuned to an opponent used to slow, incremental advances and convinced it retained initiative in any ground fight, exploited a doctrine with few contingency plans for being outnumbered or counterattacked, especially in sectors presumed quiet. On August 29, 2022, Ukraine's Southern Command openly announced the Kherson counteroffensive, eliciting exactly the response Kiev wanted. Moscow scrambled elite units southward, leaving Kharkiv defended by second-tier forces. While Russian commanders swallowed the bait, one man quietly prepared a campaign that would become a model of modern operations, Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky. Having led Kiev's defense at the invasion's outset and later named a hero of Ukraine, he was appointed to command land forces in Kharkiv Oblast and is widely regarded as the counteroffensive's architect. His edge was not only tactical craft, but a clear grasp of Russia's doctrinal weaknesses. Since spring 2022, Syrsky had studied options for striking north of Balaklia and Izium to threaten both with encirclement. When the General Staff sought diversionary proposals to pull Russian forces from Kherson's defense, he submitted his concept, one that went beyond tactics. He designed a fast-paced advance that skirted direct urban assaults to limit casualties, embodying a key modern principle: momentum and psychological shock can outweigh grinding city fights. Preparation was meticulous. Just before kickoff, each attacking brigade received at least 8 M77 howitzers to guarantee overwhelming firepower at the point of contact and punch through Russian lines. The stage set, the offensive began on September 6, 2022. Ukrainian forces surged into Russian-occupied territory, catching defenders off balance. Concentrated roughly 10 miles northwest of Balaklia, they pushed Russian troops back to the left bank of the Donets and Srednya Balaklia rivers. Special operations units, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and the 92nd Mechanized Brigade formed the spearhead, while the 25th Airborne Brigade stepped off just after 3:30 a.m., following hours of Ukrainian artillery. On day one alone, elements of the 25th advanced at least 11 miles to Volokiv Yar, a strategic road junction linking the region's towns. Seizing the road network let Ukraine elevate tempo dramatically. The speed of Russian collapse exposed doctrinal flaws that still haunt their forces. As reports described Russian troops fleeing in the northeast, Moscow was busy celebrating the city's 875th anniversary, an emblem of the gulf between battlefield reality and capital perceptions. By September 9th, Ukrainian units had driven nearly 31 miles into occupied territory, retaking Balaklia and Shevchenkove and reaching Kup'yansk on September 10th. These were hardened positions, yet they fell with minimal resistance. The psychological shock was immediate and devastating. Some analysts argued it was the first time since World War II that entire Russian units had been lost in a single battle. Ukrainian soldiers recalled Russians fleeing so fast they abandoned huge stocks of ammunition and newly fielded equipment, much of which Ukraine captured and pressed into service. the losses were staggering. Between September 6th and 11th, Ukraine claimed roughly 2,850 Russian soldiers killed and up to 590 pieces of equipment destroyed, including 86 tanks, 158 armored combat vehicles, 106 artillery systems, and 159 vehicles, plus 46 other systems, among them 6 aircraft and 7 helicopters. Independent trackers like Oryx catalogued an additional 129 captured items. Yet, equipment tallies were not the worst blow. It was the collapse of command and control. HIMARS strikes shattered ammunition depots and disrupted Russian leadership, critical nodes that Russia finds hard to regenerate but absolutely needs for effectiveness. Tactically impressive as they were, the operation's strategic effects made Kharkiv a textbook in modern warfare. The Institute for the Study of War noted Ukraine's rapid thrust severed long-held Russian ground lines of communication supplying northern Luhansk, severely hindering operations. This was not mere map coloring, it was the methodical unraveling of Russia's ability to run coherent campaigns across the Eastern Front. The momentum continued as Ukraine liberated Izium and secured the Oskil River line. By September 11th, reports indicated penetrations up to 45 miles and over 3,000 square kilometers reclaimed. Losing Kup'yansk, another rail hub, crippled Russian logistics, cutting the flow in and out of Izium and leaving it virtually exposed. As supply lines failed, Russian formations faced isolation, forced movements without gear and stores, and Ukrainian pincer attacks that split units and spoiled coordinated retreats. The Russian Ministry of Defense tried to reframe events by announcing regrouping from Balaklia and Izium to the Donetsk area to pursue the operation's aims, thin cover for a humiliating retreat. After that first devastating blow to logistics and key outposts, the rest of the advance went relatively smoothly. Russia withdrew northeast to the Oskil River, a natural line it viewed as vital. Moscow shifted forces toward Lyman, another critical node east of the Oskil in Donetsk, supplying Kharkiv from the Russian side. Even so, some sources indicated Ukraine crossed the river as early as September 13th and seized key footholds to stage the Lyman assault. In late September, Russian troops around Lyman faced a deteriorating situation their command seemed unable to fix. Ukraine systematically took nearby settlements and closed on the city. Supply routes that once sustained Lyman became liabilities as Kyiv could approach from both Donetsk and Kharkiv. Ukraine moved to cut the Lyman-Luhansk lifeline, threatening complete isolation. By September 30th, after crossing the Siversky Donets, Ukrainian forces pressed along Lyman's southern and eastern flanks while seizing ground to the northwest, cutting the last road feeding the garrison from the north. On October 1st, Ukraine entered Lyman, reportedly encircling up to 5,000 Russian troops and inflicting significant losses. That recapture effectively closed the campaign, though one could argue the outcome was decided by September 11th when Russia announced withdrawal. The Center for Strategic and International Studies dates the counteroffensive from September 6th to 13th, when Ukraine crossed the Oskil into Donetsk and essentially liberated Kharkiv Oblast, calculating an average advance of about 4.6 miles per day. CSIS calls it the fastest offensive operation in over a century, proof of how extraordinary Ukraine's execution was. The Kharkiv campaign laid bare a fundamental truth long suspected but rarely demonstrated so starkly. Numerical superiority means little if your doctrine is flawed. Russia had more soldiers, artillery, tanks, and aircraft. It had months to fortify and the initiative to choose time and place, yet lost catastrophically in under a week. This was not merely a tactical failure, it was systemic. Western weapons mattered, but what decided the lightning outcome was logistics, planning, and execution. Ukraine prevailed through superior intelligence, flexible command, and troops who understood they were fighting for their survival. Russia's centralized firepower-centric doctrine proved inadequate against an adaptive opponent able to improvise and exploit opportunities in real time. On September 10th, the UK Ministry of Defense noted Russia had barely defended many of the areas Ukraine retook. Not simple incompetence, but the predictable product of a system designed for a different war. A massive conventional clash against NATO on home turf with layered airland defenses. That doctrine was ill-suited for holding conquered ground against a nimble, technology-enabled enemy fighting for existence. Perhaps the most refined feature of Ukraine's plan was the manipulation of Russian decision-making via information warfare. Using social and mainstream media to advertise false intentions is not new, but the internet's pace and unverifiability are hallmarks of the 21st century. Ukraine used this to lower Russia's perceived risk in Kharkiv after its earlier gains there, exposing in turn a Russian shortfall in reconnaissance and independent assessment. If your strategy leans on social media chatter, you need to rethink your planning. These intelligence failures were no accident. They flowed from a rigid hierarchy that prefers fixed scripts and propaganda to adaptation. Lower-level Russian officers, especially at the front, appear to have little latitude. Plans arrived from detached echelons that spent nearly 2 years denying the war was a war. So when Ukrainian outlets hyped a southern push, Russian commanders did not validate with their own ISR. They accepted the narrative and redeployed. The implications reached far beyond Kharkiv. The success boosted Kyiv's confidence and proved to Western planners that Ukraine could do more than hold lines. It could mount sophisticated offensives rivaling recent NATO operations. As Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba argued and President Volodymyr Zelensky echoed on September 12th, more Western weapons could hasten victory on the basis of demonstrated performance, not propaganda. Regionally, Russia's setback weakened its clout. Clashes soon flared on the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, a reminder that a humiliated superpower invites challenges to its influence. For students of strategy, Lesson 1, deception remains a supreme force multiplier. Ukraine shaped the battlefield before firing by manipulating Russian deployments. Lesson 2, centralization is a critical vulnerability. Russia could not adapt quickly because it required higher-level authorization, whereas Ukraine acted on emerging opportunities. Lesson 3, logistics beats firepower. Ukraine triumphed by wrecking Russia's supply and command systems. Lesson 4, technology amplifies competence but does not create it. Western kit mattered, but planning, training, and execution mattered more. Lesson 5, decision speed wins. The side that observes, orients, decides, and acts faster usually prevails. Historically, CSIS found Kharkiv outpaced German Blitzkrieg and Israeli maneuvers in the Yom Kippur War, an exhibition of operational art at its peak. The New York Times called Izium's fall Russia's worst blow since its retreat from Kiev, accurate but still understated. Regaining vital ground seized in April, demolished Russia's momentum, forced redrawn plans, and imposed losses that demanded conscription, intensifying a demographic crunch. The lesson is blunt. In modern war, competence beats mass, adaptability beats raw firepower, and superior planning beats superior numbers. If you don't understand how Ukraine did this, you don't understand how 21st century wars will be fought. To learn how Ukraine built the force that made this possible and keeps improving, watch the next video, and for daily geopolitical updates, subscribe to the channel.